So it was the summer after my first year of seminary, and that year I had been working with a church, a little country church outside of town, as their high school Sunday school teacher. And they were going to take a camping trip. The high school kids were going to take a camping trip to Devil's Rock in Wisconsin. It's a campground, it's a public campground. And they needed an adult male chaperone. And since I had been with that group for Sunday school, they asked if I wanted to come with them. So it was me and their pastor, who was female, Judy. She was great. And there was 10, 12 high school kids. And so we went, and we were there, and that night, our first night there, we decided that we were going to, we had our tents set up in our campsites, but all of the kids decided that they wanted to, well, most of the boys, some of the girls, decided that they wanted to camp out, sleep outside of the tents, all in a row in their sleeping bags. And since all of the boys that I was in charge of were not in the tent anymore, I decided it would be a poor judgment on my part to not sleep outside where the boys were, but to stay inside with the tent all by myself. While it might be nice, was probably not the best call. So I decided I was going to move my sleeping bag out, and I would sleep outside in this row with the kids. So we set up our sleeping bags, and we were in this row, and we were getting settled down, and two of the boys came walking over, and they had chips, bags of chips. And I guess they finished them while we were laying there talking, and they decided then that they were going to just, I guess it was a good decision, to toss the potato chip bags at our feet, in the feet of our sleeping bags. So anyway, after talking for a little bit, we ended up falling asleep, and at some point in the night, I remember feeling something moving around by my feet. And I think if that were all that it was in my, sleep muddled brain, I wouldn't have even thought anything of it. But at that same point, all of a sudden, from over by our coolers, there was this loud bang, and I sat upright, and something took off running from by my feet, and I looked over, and I took my flashlight, and I shined it over at our coolers, and one of them had been knocked over, and there were, I want to say, 4 raccoons that had knocked over one of our coolers, and they had torn open a bag of hamburger buns, and they were just sitting there eating it with their little creepy human hands. Now, when you look at a wildlife magazine, or when you see a picture of a raccoon, they show cute little fluffy raccoon. Oh, look, they look like a little burglar with their little masks and all that stuff. You know, I mean, they look like little cuddly little stuffed animals, but that is a lie. Let me tell you right now, that is a lie. These raccoons, they were the creepiest, scariest, mangiest, dirtiest, grossest, most evil-looking creatures I have ever seen in my whole entire life. And matted fur and dark big fangs, and they were sitting there and they were eating our food. And I had my flashlight and I was shining at them, and all these kids were sleeping in their sleeping bags, and they were all farm kids, and they were all used to wildlife, and so I was like, they will help me, they will scare these raccoons away, because if I go at them myself, I will lose my arm and I will get rabies and die. And so I'm shaking these kids next to me, and I'm like, wake up, there are raccoons eating our food. And nobody woke up. Absolutely nobody. I was the only one that was concerned. So I'm shining my flashlight at them, and I'm like, get out of here, stupid raccoons. And they looked at me, and they were like, eh. You know, they were not scared of me. They were not intimidated by me in the least. And it briefly flashed across my mind that maybe I should get up and chase after them and be like, Rah! You know, because that would scare them. But they were 4 big, mangy raccoons, and I was afraid. They would totally eat me. They would say hamburger buns or meaty human. We're gonna go with the human. They totally would have eaten me and had no regrets. So anyway, so they're growling, and they're hissing, and they're eating, and they're mangy, and they're gross, and they're mean, and I'm sitting there huddled in my sleeping bag with my flashlight, and I don't know what to do. They're eating our food, and if I don't do anything, they're just going to go one by one and eat all of our food, and we wouldn't have anything. So not wanting to get up and not wanting to chase after them and not wanting to lose a limb or my life, I did the next best thing, and there were some rocks on the ground, and so I start picking up rocks, and I start tossing the rocks and hitting the rocks, and the rocks are hitting the raccoons, and they're eating and they're getting hit by rocks, and they're not getting, it's not phasing them much. They're just looking at me and hissing and wanting to, I think they really kind of want to come and bite my throat out. So eventually then I'm like, okay, this isn't working, so I start picking up handfuls of rocks and chucking these rocks at these raccoons. And so finally, I think that the raccoons decided that getting pelted by rocks was not worth the hamburger buns that they had found. So eventually they all four ambled off into the woods. And so I needed to figure out what to do. Our food had been broken into, our cooler was turned over, our buns had been ripped open, they had eaten several of them and parts of others. So I got up and I went over and I grabbed the bag of buns that they had gotten, and I picked it up and I just chucked it into the woods, thinking maybe that they would go after that and stay away from our food. And then I picked up the cooler and I put the lid back on, and I looked around and I saw that the picnic table, the bench of our picnic table, was low enough that I could slide the coolers underneath the picnic table bench and it would keep the lids shut. And so I thought maybe then that would prevent the raccoons from getting into our coolers. So I did that. And so then I went and I laid back down in my sleeping bag, and I'm laying there and I'm clutching my flashlight right here, you know, just waiting and waiting for something to happen. But nothing, but nothing happened until, of course, I fell asleep. And I don't know that I was asleep that long, but I woke up to pounding, like angry, like banging, pounding, and I jumped up and I shone my flashlight, and there were more raccoons this time. I want to say 6 or 7 of them. I think the other 4 had told 2 or 3 more that there was this easy place to get food, and there was this crazy guy that didn't really know what to do and just would throw rocks, but if there were enough of them, they could get the food and the rocks wouldn't be that big of a deal. But then they saw that the coolers were, they couldn't get back into the coolers, and they were angry. They may have been mad before, but they were pissed this time. And so I started chucking the rocks at them, and they're hissing and they're growling and they're baring their teeth, and I'm thinking I'm going to die, but I just keep chucking rocks. So thankfully, I think they decided that this was a losing battle, that there was no food for them there, so that they were just going to go and they were going to forget the food and leave. So they ambled off into the woods. And I ended up going back to sleep and waking up the next morning. Thankfully, they did not come back that night, but I woke up the next day and I told everybody what had happened, about how I had engaged in an epic battle, not once but twice, with these crazy, mangy, dirty, gross raccoons, and no one had woken up, and they didn't believe me, but until they saw the torn, I think they could see the torn bag of hamburger buns. Well, it used to be hamburger buns. It was just a plastic bag now that had been shredded. But yeah, so that was my epic battle with raccoons, and that's why to this day I'm not a very big fan. They are my least favorite. Well, no, bats are my least favorite, and that is a completely different story, which maybe several different stories, which maybe I will tell you at a different time. But